Welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive. I'm your host, and I am just thrilled you are joining us today.
And I'm your resident expert for this deep dive. It's really great to be here.
So today we are going to unpack this, sprawling multi-billion-dollar industry that is honestly completely invisible to most people.
It really is.
But this unseen machine fundamentally shapes the news you read, the products you buy, and even the marketing messages you are targeted with every single day. We are talking about media monitoring services.
Right. It is essentially the hidden engine of modern information logistics.
Yeah.
And when you pull back the curtain on this industry, you aren't just looking at how companies track the news. You are looking at the exact history of how human beings learn to isolate, organize, and eventually monetize information itself.
Which is just a wild concept.
Mm-hmm.
And the mission for this deep dive is to trace that incredible journey. We are going to walk you through how this industry evolved from people using literal scissors and paste in the 1800s all the way to the automated web-crawling spiders that dictate corporate strategy right now.
It's quite the leap.
It is. And our main source for this is a really comprehensive Wikipedia article that details the whole history, the evolution, and the legal hurdles of this industry. And more importantly, we want to show you exactly why this unseen ecosystem matters so much to your daily life.
It is a fascinating trajectory, really. And to truly understand where we are today with, automated bots and real-time data dashboards, we actually have to start with something deeply, inherently human.
Vanity.
Precisely. Pure vanity.
I love this origin story because it is just so relatable.
Oh, yeah.
Think about your own life before the internet, before you could just type a name into a search bar or, set up a notification on your phone. How did you know if people were talking about you?
You really didn't.
Right. If you did something noteworthy or even something controversial, how did you actually find out what the press was saying?
It was a massive logistical problem. I mean, you couldn't possibly buy and read every single newspaper, magazine, and journal published every day.
No way.
The sheer volume of print media, even back in the 19th century, was just overwhelming for any one person to track.
Which leads to this incredible anecdote from Paris. This is in 1879.
Right, Alfred Cherie.
Yes. He started an agency called L'Argus de la Presse. And he didn't start it for some grand journalistic purpose.
None at all.
He started it specifically because Parisian theatrical actors wanted to read reviews of their own performances.
Naturally.
But these actors didn't want to shell out the money to buy an entire bulky newspaper just to read one tiny blurb about themselves.
It is the ultimate human motivation, wanting to know what others think of you, but without paying full price for the privilege.
Exactly.
But while those Parisian actors make for a wonderful snapshot of 1879, the actual structural timeline of this industry stretches back a bit further.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the first official press clipping agency was actually established in London in 1852.
Wow.
It was started by a man named Henry Romeich, who partnered with a news dealer named Curtis.
So over a century and a half ago, who were they serving in London? Was it also just actors?
Well, it started with actors, certainly, but it very quickly expanded to business tycoons, politicians, wealthy socialites.
The elites.
Right. These were people who were eager to see their names in print. They were essentially paying for the 19th century equivalent of an ego surf.
An analog ego surf. I love that.
They wanted the validation of being mentioned in the societal pages, but they definitely didn't want to do the legwork of finding those mentions.
Okay, but wait. If they weren't using search engines, how did these early clipping bureaus actually pull this off? The workflow to achieve this manually must have been incredibly tedious.
Oh, it was a massive manual undertaking, and it functioned essentially as a highly gendered assembly line.
How so?
First, these agencies employed women to sit in large rooms and manually scan through massive stacks of daily periodicals.
Just reading all day.
Yes. Their entire job was to read walls of tiny text, specifically looking for names, companies, or terms requested by their clients.
Just imagine the sheer eye strain.
I know.
The concentration required to do that for 8 to 10 hours a day. Scanning thousands of pages of newsprint for a passing mention of a specific socialite.
And once the women found a mention and marked the page, those marked periodicals were passed along to a completely different department.
Let me guess.
Staffed entirely by men.
Of course.
And these men would literally take scissors, cut the articles out, and paste them onto dated slips of paper.
So it was quite literally a clipping service.
Exactly. Scissors, paste, and paper. Then those pasted slips would go back to the women, who would sort them by client and physically mail these clippings out.
But surely an industry can't sustain itself purely on the vanity of socialites and actors forever. At
Yeah.
what point does this shift from a novelty service to a fundamental business tool?
That pivot happens firmly by the 1930s. The bulk of clipping subscriptions completely shifted away from wealthy individuals and toward big business. It transitioned from a vanity project to a corporate necessity.
Makes sense.
Government agencies started subscribing to track public sentiment. And critically, companies started using the services to monitor their competitors.
So instead of asking, what are they saying about me, the question became, what are they saying about my rival's new product?
Precisely. It was the birth of modern competitive intelligence.
Wow.
Businesses realized that if they could track every mention of a competitor's pricing or a competitor's regional expansion, they could adjust their own strategies accordingly.
That is a huge advantage.
And it became a massive enterprise in itself. In the United States, by 1932, just two companies controlled the market.
Only two.
Yeah. The Romica Company and Luce's Press Clipping Bureau. Together, they controlled roughly 80% of the entire clipping market.
80%.
Yeah.
They practically monopolized the market on knowing who was saying what.
They really did.
But here is where the story hits a fascinating wall. Up until the mid-20th century, mass media was almost solely print media. Newspapers, trade journals, magazines.
Right.
You can easily cut an article out of a newspaper with scissors.
But as telegraphy expands and then eventually gives way to radio and television broadcasting, how in the world did this scissors and paste industry adapt?
It was tough.
I mean, you cannot cut a segment out of a live radio broadcast.
You can't. And it was a massive vulnerability for the industry. For a significant period, these monitoring services were severely limited because they simply could not offer comprehensive tracking of broadcast media.
They just missed it entirely.
Pretty much. If a company was criticized on a national radio program, the Clipping Bureau couldn't mail them a transcript the next day. The technology just wasn't there.
So they were essentially flying blind when it came to the fastest growing mediums in the world.
Until the 1950s and 1960s.
What changed?
That is when we see the commercial introduction of audio and videotape recording systems.
Magnetic tape. Exactly. This was the technological leap the industry desperately needed. It finally allowed the broadcast airwaves to be captured, recorded, transcribed, and tracked for clients. It brought radio and television into the fold of information logistics.
Okay, so now they're monitoring what is written in print and what is spoken on the airwaves. But as revolutionary as magnetic tape was, nothing really compares to the shift that happens next.
The digital age.
We have to talk about the internet boom of the 1990s.
Yeah.
How did these legacy paper-based companies survive the transition to the web? Did they just go out of business?
Some certainly did. If you couldn't adapt to digital, you died. But others adapted brilliantly.
Pretty cool.
A perfect example from the source is a company called the Universal Press Clipping Bureau. They were founded all the way back in 1908 in Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay.
For decades, their entire business model was clipping physical paper. Then the 1990s hit, the internet emerges, and they make a massive pivot. They completely rebranded.
What did they change their name to?
Universal Information Services. And that was to reflect their expansion into digital technology.
That is a profound shift in terminology, going from clipping, which is a tangible physical action with scissors, to information services, which is entirely abstract.
It perfectly reflects the digitization of knowledge itself, and the timeline moved incredibly fast.
How fast?
By 1998, platforms like the now-defunct web clipping website were actively monitoring internet-based news media. Fast forward to 2012, and the research firm Gartner estimated there were more than 250 different social media monitoring vendors operating globally.
That is wild. From two guys in London in 1852 to a sprawling digital infrastructure with hundreds of tech vendors.
It's exponential.
But beyond just the speed and the technology, there's a much deeper conceptual shift here, isn't there?
There is, and it is arguably the biggest aha moment of this entire evolution.
Tell us about that.
Well, the transition wasn't just about faster delivery or better technology. It was a fundamental psychological shift in how human beings interact with data.
Walk us through that. How did a clipping service change human psychology?
Think about reading a newspaper before clipping services existed. An article was permanently bound to its context.
Right.
You sat down, you opened the paper, and you read the article alongside the advertisements, the neighboring stories, the editorial page. The information was part of a larger, cohesive package.
You took in the whole broadsheet.
Exactly. But clipping services introduced the concept of the isolated snippet.
Because they literally cut the information out of its context.
Yes. The foundational idea that a specific piece of information could be extracted, isolated, and consumed entirely on its own, that was revolutionary.
I never thought about it that way.
And that specific conceptual leap directly influenced the interfaces of early digital news databases like LexisNexis.
Oh, wow.
It laid the psychological groundwork for the keyword searches you and I use every single day. We no longer search for publications. We search for isolated pieces of data.
So the 19th century actors who just wanted to read their own theater reviews were inadvertently pioneering the way we Google things today.
Pretty much.
They trained us to consume information in isolated snippets.
It is the genesis of modern search behavior. The Clipping Bureau was the analog predecessor to the search engine.
Let's bring this directly into the present day and directly to you, our listener. We have covered the history and the shift in how we consume data. But what does this invisible machine actually look like right now? Why should you care about media monitoring today?
Because it runs the modern business and political world.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely. The industry has evolved so far past physical clippings that it is now referred to as media intelligence or information logistics. Today, if you look at online tools you might use, like Google Alerts, or massive corporate platforms like Meltwater, Cision, MediaNet, and Muckrack, they're all the direct descendants of that Parisian clipping bureau.
But instead of employing rooms full of people to read every page, they utilize automated software.
Right. We are talking about web crawlers, bots or spiders that constantly roam the internet.
Just continuously scanning.
Yes. They are automatically monitoring the content of free online news sources, newspapers, magazines, trade journals, news syndication services, and they are doing this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And the applications for this constant surveillance are endless. It is no longer just actors checking reviews.
Not at all.
Today, every single organization that relies on public relations uses news monitoring. They use it to track their own corporate publicity, obviously. But they also use it to monitor new legislation that might affect their supply chains or to track emerging trends in their specific industry.
It's also a massive tool for verification.
Affleck.
PR and marketing departments use these platforms to verify that their messaging is actually landing with their target audience. If a company launches a new product, they don't just hope people talk about it. They have bots quantifying exactly how many times it was mentioned, in what regions, and with what sentiment.
So they know instantly if a campaign is working or failing.
Exactly. And it extends far beyond the corporate world. City, state, and federal government agencies are massive consumers of these monitoring services.
Oh, to keep tabs on public opinion.
That, and they need to stay informed about regions and municipalities they couldn't possibly monitor manually. They use these services to verify that the public safety information that they are putting out is accurate, accessible, and actually reaching the communities that need it.
And the way this data is delivered to the client has completely transformed. It used to be overnight mail with physical slips of paper. Now it's real-time digital dashboards.
Yes, the focus is entirely on auto-analysis. The data isn't just dumped on a client's desk. It is indexed into highly searchable databases where it can be viewed, cross-referenced, and compared in real time across multiple different media formats.
But how do they handle television now? You can't just have a bot watch a video in the same way it reads a text article.
It is a really clever technological workaround, actually. For television monitoring, particularly in the US, the companies capture and index the closed captioning text of the broadcast.
Well, that's smart.
Right. They run keyword searches against the subtitles, essentially turning the spoken broadcast back into text data that can be easily scraped.
But even with all of this incredible technology, the web crawlers, the closed caption indexing, the real-time databases, there is still a massive blind spot, isn't there?
There is, and it is a fascinating limitation. You would assume that a multi-billion-dollar network of bots catches absolutely everything.
Right.
But they don't. And now the reason why is the enduring divide between print and digital media.
Right, because most local and regional newspapers do not actually upload all of their physical print content onto their websites.
Exactly.
And conversely, a lot of publications have exclusive web content that never sees a printing press.
Yes. If a company relies solely on an automated online bot, they might completely miss a crucial, highly damaging article that only ran in the physical Sunday print edition of a prominent local paper. The digital record is simply not the complete record.
Which is why some of these monitoring companies still employ actual human monitors to review certain broadcasts and write abstracts.
They have to.
Because bots can't easily detect sarcasm or read a physical paper that isn't online.
Exactly. Human comprehension and physical access are still necessary to capture the nuances that algorithms miss.
Okay, so let's look at the big picture here. We have this massive global industry. It operates by deploying bots to crawl the web, copying text, scraping headlines, indexing closed captions, packaging that organized data, and selling it to paying clients.
Right.
If you are sitting there thinking, wait a minute, isn't there a huge legal problem with taking other people's articles and selling access to them? Well, you would be absolutely right.
It was only a matter of time. When you build an entire infrastructure on copying and sharing the hard work of journalists and publishers, eventually the lawyers are going to get involved.
Unavoidable.
And that brings us to the dramatic climax of this industry's evolution, the legal showdowns.
The year 2012 seems to be the tipping point.
It was the year the original creators fought back. There were two major parallel cases that developed in 2012. You had one landmark case in the United States, Associated Press versus Meltwater,
Okay.
and another major case in the United Kingdom involving the Public Relations Consultants Association, the PRCA, against the Newspaper Licensing Agency.
And while they were happening in different countries, the core issue the courts were being asked to decide was fundamentally the same, wasn't it?
Yes. The courts were essentially being asked to rule on the core legality of the modern media monitoring business model.
Let's break down exactly what Meltwater, the media monitoring company acting as the defendant in these cases, was actually doing.
Sure.
Because they weren't just sending their clients a hyperlink to an article. They were sending automated web scrapers to news sites,
Yep.
making temporary digital copies of the articles, and then displaying those media clippings, the headlines and the snippets of text, directly to their paying clients on their own platform.
And the plaintiffs, the Associated Press in the U.S., and a copyright collection society representing newspapers in the UK argued this was blatant copyright infringement.
They were happy.
No. They argued that Meltwater was profiting off of their journalistic labor without permission or compensation.
It's a massive test of the boundaries of copyright law in the digital age, because the internet is built on sharing links and snippets.
True.
But these services were scraping the content, pulling it into their own walled-off systems, and charging corporate clients a premium to view it.
So how did the courts actually rule?
The outcomes dealt a heavy blow to the monitoring services. In the United States, the court ruled that Meltwater's activity was unlawful because it did not fall under the fair use doctrine.
For anyone who might not be deep into copyright law, fair use is basically the legal concept that allows you to use a small portion of copyrighted material under certain specific conditions, like if you are providing commentary, criticism, or parody without having to ask the original creator for permission. Correct. But the U.S. court looked at what Meltwater was doing and said, no, this is not fair use. You are not critiquing the news. You are just packaging and selling someone else's news.
Which is a huge distinction.
Very much so. And over in the UK, operating under UK and EU copyright law, the ruling was just as consequential. The courts determined that service providers absolutely require a license to operate this kind of business.
And what about the clients using the service?
They ruled that the corporate users paying for the service also need to be licensed.
There is a really interesting nuance to the UK ruling that highlights the complexities of the internet. Technically speaking, if an individual person just went to a website and viewed the original source without copying a snippet or printing it out, that is not infringement.
Right.
And making temporary cached digital copies in the background of your browser just to enable a web page to load a lawful purpose is totally fine.
But the courts recognized reality. They looked at the monitoring services and said, that is not what you were doing. These businesses don't just passively facilitate a view. They aggressively aggregate, organize, and present the content as a commercial product. The purely commercial nature of the service meant they couldn't hide behind the excuse of making harmless temporary copies.
It was a business model.
Exactly. They were packaging and selling access to copyrighted material, and therefore they had to pay for licenses from the original publishers.
It creates such a fascinating tension. On one hand, you have this deep historical human desire to aggregate knowledge, to know what is being said, to organize the absolute chaos of the daily news cycle.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have the absolute legal and ethical necessity to protect the original creators, the journalists and the publishers who actually put in the hard work to report and write the news in the first place.
It is the central conflict of the information age. Who owns the snippet? When a headline or a sentence is isolated from its original source and put into a database, does it become public domain, or is it still owned property?
And the court said it's property.
In 2012, the courts firmly answered that yes, it is owned property.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, take a moment to look at the incredible scope of the journey we just took. We started in 1879, with Parisian theatrical actors paying Alfred Jarry to physically cut out paper reviews with scissors just so they could stroke their own egos.
A very humble beginning.
Then we watched that vanity project morph into a massive corporate necessity in the 1930s, dominating the print landscape.
We saw the technological leaps moving from tracking radio waves on magnetic audio tape to building automated web spiders that relentlessly crawl the internet 24 hours a day.
It's just staggering.
We saw an entire industry force a psychological shift in how humanity views information, paving the way for the keyword searches and isolated data points we all rely on today.
And finally, we arrived at the modern courtroom battles over copyright and fair use, proving that even invisible, automated logistics machines are still bound by the laws and property rights of the physical world. It really is a massive global infrastructure shaping corporate strategy right beneath our noses.
It is. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought, building on the trajectory of everything we have discussed today.
I'd love to hear it.
For over 150 years, from those Parisian clipping bureaus with their scissors and paste, to the modern server farms at Meltwater and Muckrack, media monitoring has fundamentally been about one thing: tracking what human beings are writing, broadcasting, and saying about other human beings.
The human element has always been the core of the data.
Exactly. But today, we are entering a radically different era. As artificial intelligence increasingly generates our news articles, writes corporate press releases, and floods our social media feeds with synthetic posts, we are rapidly approaching a surreal future.
Where is it heading?
We are heading toward a world where AI-driven monitoring bots are endlessly scraping the web simply to analyze and index the output of other AI bots.
Wow. An endless loop of machines reading machines.
It forces us to ask a profound question. What exactly happens to media intelligence when the media itself is entirely artificial? Are we simply building multi-billion-dollar infrastructures just to read what our own algorithms have written?
That is an incredible point to end on. An entire industry built over a century and a half to track human opinion, slowly turning into a closed echo chamber of algorithms.
It's definitely something to think about.
We hope this journey through the unseen history of media monitoring has completely changed the way you look at the news snippets in your feed today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we encourage you to keep questioning the invisible systems that shape your world.